So did Jesus use God's name, Yahweh or Jehovah, in his ministry? This turned out to be very interesting. Jesus grew up speaking 3 languages. At home in Galilee, he would have spoken Aramaic with his family and friends. Hebrew wasn't used in everyday life. It was used in the synagogue and by the religious people, but Aramaic was the language of the day. However, the first 2 years of Jesus' life were spent in Egypt, where he would have come into contact, amazingly, with Greek, because Greek was the language of business. Joseph, Jesus' father, was a carpenter and would have conducted his business dealings in Greek, so Jesus was very familiar with it. We know he spoke Greek because he preached to the Jews who had moved to the Decapolis, which was on the east of the Jordan, and they only spoke Greek. He was able to converse with them without any problems. Now, every Jewish boy had a really good education, and they were taught to both read and write Hebrew. And every Sabbath they would hear the Hebrew language being read out. It seems that the form of service was that, first of all, you would have a reading from the law of Moses. That would have been in Hebrew, and then there would have been a reading from the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, or something like that. So we come to Luke chapter 4, and it says here, this was at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, and he says, as was his custom, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath, and he stood up to read. And it seems it was his turn to read the book of Isaiah, but he was given the scroll, which was in Hebrew. Now, I'm going to try and put up a photograph, and it's not a very good one, I'm sorry, of what Jesus would have read, but there's English underneath it. But remember, Hebrew is written from right to left, so the English is from right to left and a bit difficult to follow. See how you get on. This is Isaiah 61 verses 1 and 2. Jesus would have read the Hebrew from this passage. You'll note that Jehovah's name appears twice on the top line and once again a bit further down. I'll read you the English from the Jerusalem Bible because they more faithfully put God's name where it was in the Hebrew, but they use Yahweh. And it's from Isaiah 61 verses 1 and 2. The Spirit of the Lord Yahweh has been given to me, for Yahweh has anointed me. He has sent me to bring good news to the poor, to bind up hearts that are broken. Jesus would not have been affected by any superstition, besides which the synagogue was a holy place, the scrolls were considered holy, it was perfectly acceptable to use God's name, either Yahweh or Jehovah, whichever translation you prefer. Now, on an earlier occasion, Jesus also quoted from the Hebrew Scriptures, and we'll go here to Matthew chapter 4. Now, Jesus had been in the wilderness because he had just realized who he was and what he had to do, and it was something to come to grips with. So he was hungry after 40 days. The devil said to him, if you're the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread. Now, the devil tempted him a couple of times, and Jesus, in reply to him, quoted from Deuteronomy chapter 8 and verse 3, Deuteronomy chapter 6 verses 13 and 16. Now I'm going to try to show you photographs of some of these in Hebrew. See how you get on with them. But remember, Jesus was now quoting from memory, but his memory would have been in Hebrew. The devil's perfectly capable of understanding Hebrew. I'll read you these in English from the Jerusalem Bible. Here we have Deuteronomy chapter 6 verses 4 and 13, which Jesus would have quoted from memory, most likely in Hebrew with Jehovah's name. The Lord made the Israelites go hungry in order for them to understand that man does not live on bread alone, but man lives on everything that comes from the mouth of Yahweh. Then we have Deuteronomy 6 and verse 13. God brought them out of the land of Egypt. You must fear Yahweh your God. You must serve him, and by his name you must swear. And verse 16, it says, do not put Yahweh your God to the test. Jesus, remembering these in Hebrew, would have used God's name. What's interesting about this passage is that the devil did not use God's name. Yes, he quoted Scripture, but he was careful not to use one where God's name was. He didn't refer to God at all, because he wanted to be God. However, having said all that, throughout his ministry, when you read the Gospels, you will note that Jesus referred to his Father as Father. Matthew 6, where he's teaching us to pray, he teaches us to pray to our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. In John chapter 8 and verse 28, speaking to the Jews, he said, I do nothing on my own authority, but speak just as the Father taught me. And he who sent me is with me. He has not left me alone, for I'd always do the things that are pleasing to him. Whenever Jesus spoke of his Father, he spoke with great reverence, with great respect, and with great love. His Father had taught him everything, so Jesus kindly came here to try and teach us some of it. The depths of God's wisdom was revealed in Jesus Christ, for which we can be most grateful. In John chapter 17, Jesus concludes in prayer to his Father, I have made your name known to them. I will continue to make it known. Did he mean his name Jehovah? They knew God's name, Jehovah or Yahweh, because they heard it in the synagogue nearly every week. What they didn't know was the great love that God had. This love was evident in the Hebrew Scriptures, but the extent of God's love for us, to send his Son, to teach us wisdom, to die for us, to give us salvation. What Jesus was emphasizing is that God, Jehovah God, is our Father, and someone we can rely on. He has given us salvation, but he will help us through these very difficult times, as any good father would do. So take care, and thank you so much for watching.